If a music studio has controlled environments that can produce the best type of sound, why would a person ever want to listen to a live album? This is exactly the sort of question that producers were asking themselves in 1972, especially Martin Birch, Deep Purple's producer. The British band had never made a live album because they truly believed that what they did live didn't compare to how they could be in the studio. And they weren't alone. Many studios and producers thought that a live album was essentially a budget album, something you did for fun after all the studio albums were produced. But then an H-bomb changed that. No, not a hydrogen bomb. Instead, I'm talking about a bootleg. Around this time period in 1972, the bootleg market was running rampant, especially when it came to Deep Purple's live concerts. H-bomb was a specific recording of Deep Purple in Ashen in 1970, and it is still known as one of the best-selling bootlegs of all time. This bootleg gained so much notoriety that it ended up being used in a court case in Europe to legalize them. These new laws wouldn't stop the production of them, however, so in an attempt to quell the market, and after seeing success in other live albums at the time, such as The Who, Live at Leeds, Deep Purple decided to make a live album of their own, Made in Japan. Although they made up the title in reference to where the live album was recorded, Made in Japan had an underlying meaning. To find out in the 50s through the 70s in Europe that something was made in Japan was seen as being second-rate. Giving the double LP this title furthered that image that capturing Deep Purple live would be worse than in studio. The band required 3 conditions before recording this album. 1, that it only come out in Japan. 2, that it wouldn't come out if they didn't like it. And 3, they wanted to use their own producer. This album records 2 live concerts in Japan, both in Osaka and Tokyo. Most of the tracks off this album come off Deep Purple's most recent studio album, Machine Head, although there are a few off of their other releases, Deep Purple in Rock and Fireball. When you look at the track list, however, one may quickly raise an eyebrow. There's only 7 tracks on this entire double album, which typically is about an hour plus in length. This means that the tracks are very long, ranging from 10 to 20 minutes in length, whereas their studio album counterparts would typically range about 5 to 7 minutes. Why is this? Deep Purple did a lot of improvisation on stage as a theatrical performance. Ritchie Blackmore, the lead guitarist, and Ian Gillan, the vocalist, had sort of a battle to the death between the two of them on stage, showcasing each of their talents while trying to outdo each other. You hear this most distinctly on the album with the track Strange Kind of Woman, where Blackmore will play a riff that Gillan will then sing. It reminds me a bit of the end of Money by Pink Floyd, where Waters does the same thing with Gilmour's guitar playing, except this time, Blackmore and Gillan are doing it live. And they weren't the only ones in the band trying to outdo each other. We see it throughout their performances, where even the drummer, Ian Pace, lets rip a very long drum solo on the track Mule, or when John Lord references classical pieces on different tracks in his solos. The band felt pretty good about their performance and chose not to overdub the tracks, meaning that what you hear on Made in Japan is exactly how it sounded in 1972. This would have been ludicrous to do nowadays, as most studios do a ton of work to clean up sound to make sure it sounds good enough to release. Deep Purple showed their work to Warner Brothers Studios, who again, because of the feeling about live albums, decided that as it was the agreement, they didn't want to release it outside of Japan. However, they soon changed their tune when the album continued to be bootlegged across Europe and the US, eventually choosing to release it worldwide. It's a good thing they did because it went platinum in 2 weeks. But that brings us back to the question, what is it about this album that is so good? And most importantly, what makes a live album so good? Deep Purple released this album in 1972 with a lineup referred to as MK2. There have been several different lineups of this band throughout the years, but many fans of Deep Purple refer to this as the best lineup, and it's hard to argue with them. Their album Machine Head is considered the de facto album that fans point others to if they want to get into Deep Purple. But, as stated before, the studio album Machine Head only gives you half of the picture. Unfortunately, you can't hop in a time machine to go back to 1972 to hear how they played. Or can you? Because Deep Purple recorded Made in Japan at the time they did, were able to do just this. If Deep Purple had never released this album in 1972, they would have never preserved who they were at that time for the rest of eternity. Only a year after, the lineup would change, Gillan would lose his vocal power, and the band's relevance would fade. In a world where things are fleeting, live albums are not only seen as a way to attend a concert if you can't go that night, they also preserve an artist's music at a particular point in time. In addition, to listen to only the studio audio albums of an artist, you only get half of the picture. It's kind of like seeing a movie in black and white versus color. So, if you're one of those people that wonders what's in it for them to listen to a live album like Warner Brothers, Deep Purple, and Martin Birch were thinking in 1972, just remember that despite their previous judgment, they also had a part in releasing what is still thought of as one of the greatest live albums of all time. Pretty good for a budget album, huh? Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this. I can't keep doing this without your help and support. I hope this helps. Love you all.